I have my springtime shirt on. I'm sorry, Dr. Darnell, that you're in Detroit and you're having a ice storm today and freezing. Here in New Hampshire, it's nice and warm. It's about 50 degrees, I think, and sunny. Not gloating, just giving the weather report. So I have my spring shirt on for that. All right, let me get my ugly mug off of there. I want to put up a couple of things very quickly. Doug Diamond, our good friend, our webmaster, our audio-visual expert, our webmaster, our technical guru, has advised me this morning, because I have some concerns about playing these videos on YouTube and having my channel taken down for copyright issues, infringement, etc. So I'm going to just say, for the sake of YouTube, that this is material being used for educational purposes. It's being used under the U.S. Code 17106 for fair use of educational materials, and no copyright is being purposefully infringed upon. This is really just spreading the word, if you will. So with that out of the way, I'd like to put up a couple of things here. We're going to be talking about mediating, and let me just define mediate before we get into the meat of this. To mediate, to intervene between people in a dispute in order to bring about an agreement or reconciliation. In the technical application, it is to bring about a physiological effect. In other words, the example they give is the right hemisphere plays an important role in mediating tactile perception of direction. Now, that is man's definition of mediate. What I would like to do is to give my interpretation of mediate in the context of the Christian perspective, and that is that Jesus Christ is our intercessor, in other words, a mediator, our intercessor between us and God the Father, our Creator. So Matthew 10:26 applies today. And again, this is going to be rather graphic material. This is not done to be salacious, sensational, or fear-mongering either. This is to show you an extension, interestingly, of the January issue of Entangled magazine regarding the third strand of DNA, and this month's issue in February of Entangled regarding the density of data as it pertains to DNA. We are going to continue that conversation. We are going to go into something very deep in terms of DNA and other biological materials being used for what is known as bio-inspired design. Bio-inspired design for augmenting the human body, perhaps replacing the human body, that's my hypothesis. And also it is being applied in architecture for the building of structures. So we are going to cover that today. There is so much in this particular example of bio-inspired design, and I'm only going to focus on one individual and one website. This is coming out of MIT, that perhaps tomorrow, I'll decide at the end of this presentation. We'll see how much we cover today. But I may hold this topic over and extend it into tomorrow. Postponing our classroom session tomorrow until Thursday of next week, focusing on some of the shorthand of mathematical and mathematical equations in physics. I think it's so important that we really cover this subject in detail, because it, again, pulls together so many of the areas of research that you and I have been talking about, that I think we need 2 days to cover it. So, Matthew 10:26, fear them not, therefore, for there is nothing covered that shall not be revealed, and hid that shall not be known. That's what we've been doing here in our conversations all along, is revealing what I like to call the revealing of the evidence of evil, or giving the testimony, giving the facts, presenting the evidence as in a courtroom, and revealing the truth. That certainly applies today. This is going to be quite revealing for you. So let me just check the chat room before I really get into this. Doug is in here. Kathy and Andy. I see Kathleen is here. All righty, very good. Dave Williamson, of course. All righty, we have a good group of people, large group of people. Genesis is here, beyond what I see in chat, so good turnout today. All right, so without, as I like to say, I like to get right into it. Without any further ado, we are going to play at least 2 video clips today. They are a little bit long. They're about 15 minutes on average. So if you would like to get a cup of Entangled coffee, there's a little plug. Get a cup of coffee. You can go to my website and order Entangled private label coffee. Gourmet coffee. Outstanding stuff. So, little plug at the beginning, but you may need to have a beverage of choice for a couple of these videos, because they are about 15 minutes long, but also because you don't want to be distracted. You don't want to leave in the middle of these videos or be interrupted. Again, not trying to be sensational. It's just, this is important information that really reveals what's going on in the world of biology. Biology is taking over really a lot of the, scientific disciplines themselves. I underscore that by saying that quantum mechanics, quantum computing, particle physics at the quantum scale is the hub of the wheel. And from that is radiating out the other scientific disciplines. But in that process, we see a funneling down, a narrowing down at the neck of the funnel of these scientific disciplines, focusing on the human body. Satan hates God's construct. Therefore, he absolutely hates us, because we are constructed, we are created in the image of the Creator, of God himself. And of course, Satan is at war with God, Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit, the Holy Trinity, and those 2/3 of the angels that are not fallen. And we know there's a war, there's a battle going on that is spiritual, but it is also physical. You cannot separate the physical from the spiritual. Today I'm going to show you the obvious spiritual influence from the satanic side into bio-inspired design, as it's known. Biology is not only applied to living matter in terms of plants, animals, human beings, but it is also migrating at a very rapid pace into architecture, into structural materials. Now, I shared with you in the February issue of Entangled magazine. If you have not read that magazine yet, I encourage you to. And by the way, we are speaking to the Blog Talk Radio audience. This will be rebroadcast on Friday. They will not have the benefit of seeing the videos. They can, of course, listen, and they won't see the graphics that I'm going to post. So I encourage you, if you're on Blog Talk Radio listening to this, and we have several thousand people in that audience every Friday, to please come over to Patreon, become part of this Patreon group that has hired myself and my wife, Kathleen, as researchers and reporters for the patrons. This will not be posted on YouTube unless Doug and I decide that we will make it public. But we'll see. Anyway, bio-inspired design related to materials that we would not consider to be in the context of biology. When you think about building a house, building an office building, building works of art, which I'm going to show you some art today, we don't typically think about biology. We think of solid materials like stone, concrete, steel, fiberglass, carbon fiber even. But now the direction is coming from biology, and in the Entangled magazine in February, I took the liberty of utilizing most of that magazine to show you the different examples of bioprinters, 3D bioprinters. Bioprinters focused on biology, but also 3D printing in general that can produce not only tissues and organs and vascular systems and the skeletal system of the human body, but these also, as you know, and more people are familiar with 3D printing in the world of materials such as plastics, molten metals, and even glass. I'm going to show you molten glass 3D printing today, but typically 3D materials that are non-biological in the 3D printing world. So what I did in February in the Entangled magazine was bring you from the solid materials world, so to speak, into the biological as it has to do with 3D printing. That was very prescient, not on my part, but this is the leading of the Holy Spirit. I don't take credit for any of this. It's become very obvious that the direction of research that the Holy Spirit is taking myself and Kathleen is both spiritual, but in the physical as well, into the biological direction. I think we've covered quantum computing to the point of exhaustion. Not that there isn't more to learn and talk about, but I think we have a grasp on quantum computing. I think the same could be said about CERN, particle physics, quantum mechanics. And therefore, I think the Holy Spirit is leading us most assuredly into this focus into the biological world. And this is why in February we talked about printing, but in January we talked about the source materials, those being the materials of DNA. And it's rather mind-boggling to begin to think about DNA, the building blocks of DNA, the chemicals of DNA, the proteins of DNA being utilized in architecture. So, I encourage you, if you have not subscribed, which you can do independent of Patreon, you can subscribe to Entangled magazine, and you'll receive all the back issues all the way to June of 2017 when the magazine was founded. But you would have some catching up to do with this audience, with this chat room group here today, this live stream group. Catch up with the patrons. They have the benefit of the magazine and the live streams and a whole lot of other material, webinars, etc. But actually, beginning back in August of last year in the magazine, we were talking about 3D printing of biomaterials. And we were talking about the skeletal system. And we had a conversation about synthetic life forms. And we moved on through the magazine through subsequent issues talking about the wheat and the tares. And exhaustively talking about Sanctuary.ai, the D-Wave inspired company, producing synthetic life forms that by their own words they call them synths, and by their own words they describe them as being indistinguishable from humans. Well, today what I'm going to show you is a deeper revelation into the production of synthetic life forms. This is not coming from Sanctuary, one of the other D-Wave companies. This is not coming from Kindred, one of the D-Wave companies, nor Quadrant, nor D-Wave itself. But it is indicative of the things that I have shown you before from people like Dr. Suzanne Gilder at Sanctuary.ai, who makes these proclamations and who also is an artist. And I've shared with you her very dark art. Some people might call it Gnostic. It is definitely dark, demonic artwork of Dr. Suzanne Gilder. You're familiar with that as patrons. We've shared that. Well, there is a definite correlation to the person that I'm about to reveal to you. I will say with conjecture, not a hypothesis, I will say with conjecture, it's possible the company, the lab I'm about to share with you, and the people at the lab are working with Sanctuary and Dr. Suzanne Gilder. At this point, I don't have any evidence to that, so I will not consider it to be a hypothesis, but pure conjecture. I will let you draw your own conclusions as to whether there's a connection between these two organizations. And here we go. This is an MIT laboratory by the name of Mediated Matter. This is why I defined mediated. This is a counterfeiting of Jesus Christ. This is a counterfeiting of creation. Mediated is used specifically as a counterfeit of God and Jesus Christ being our intercessor or mediator. This is in violation of and blasphemous of God's creation. I would urge you to go to Mediated Matter on your own. We're going to go through some of this today. There is so much on this website that we can't cover it in 2 hours. I'm going to take you to probably what is the most disturbing. We'll begin with the artwork. This is the artwork that is produced by the founder of Mediated Matter. She's a co-founder. She's a PhD in computer design and in architecture by the name of Neri Oxman, spelled N-E-R-I. The last name is Oxman, O-X-M-A-N. She is an Israeli American, and you're going to see a couple of videos with her. I found these very deeply disturbing in not so much what she is showing, but what she is saying. Pay very close attention to the words that I share with you when I read some of the material, but listen to her words very carefully. And you'll need to go back through these on your own again. Use your spiritual discernment. Focus on the words from a spiritual perspective, from a Christian perspective, with the eyes and ears of the Holy Spirit giving you the discernment. I'm going to show you some of the images from here, just scrolling through, and then we'll begin to read through here. I'm just going to go over it very quickly, and then we'll dig into it. What I'm showing you are images images of death masks. She calls these Vespers. These are artistic creations in glass using a printer, 3D printer using molten glass technology that they developed at Mediated Matter Laboratory. Again, we'll get into these. Just kind of giving you an overview as we scroll through this. Mary Oxman. This is a Digital Art Weekly article from September of last year. And I'm just going to scroll through this as well. And we will go back to these images later. Again, I'm sorry if these are disturbing, but let's take this from a scientific perspective. And I'm going to play the first video here. How can we design relationships? I'm going to back that up and read it again. How can we design relationships between the most primitive and sophisticated forms of life? again, for the benefit of our Blog Talk Radio audience, that wasn't just a musical interlude. We were actually watching the 3D printing of devices that will be worn outside the body, as described by Dr. Oxman. This is the augmentation of the human body. Now, I'm showing some images to the folks on Patreon today from that video. Now, I want to explain this. They call this the Wanderers, an astrobiological exploration. This has come back from 2014, so some of this is new to us, but certainly not new to the people developing this, and indicative of the timeline, the dates that I'm sharing with you today in the presentation. You can only imagine, you can extrapolate how much further along they are in the development, especially taking it and applying to the discussions of sanctuary and wanting to produce synthetic life forms that are indistinguishable from humans. So these 3D printed devices are worn outside the body, and their hypothesis, their imagining, is that if we had humans that were traveling through the cosmos, that they would need their bodies to be augmented such that they could, for example, I'll give you a few of the bullet points. For example, devices of augmentation that are biological devices that can take sunlight from the sun. Imagine, let's say you're on the moon, just to make this an easy example, and you're taking the sun, the energy from the sun, and converting that energy not just into electricity as you would think with photocells, but for the body's use, converting energy from the sun into sugars. In other words, augmentation for the body for its natural systems to then be fed, to be powered, to increase strength and mobility, to have resistance to radiation, to provide heat and cooling to the body from these externally 3D printed, from biological material, 3D printed augmentation devices. Okay? Including, in the picture that I'm showing here, this is an external version of the large intestine and small intestine of the human body outside this person's body. So I'm going to read this. Wanderers, an astrobiological exploration. This series draws from the idea of human enhancement behind imaginary beings, yet departs from structural and anatomical additions to focus on biological prosthesis, allowing humans to sustain light in extreme otherworldly environments. All wearable artifacts work with both 3D printing and synthetic biology and help generate biomass, water, air, light, depending on the requirements of destination planets and satellites. As such, Luna's Wanderers, Quamar, provides with a pneumatic surface for generating and storing oxygen, while the wearable for Saturn, Zual, converts hydrocarbons into consumable goods, and Jupiter's Mushtari functions as an external digestive system for the increased production of biomass. Let me put this in context for you. Based on the discussions that we've had, where Kathleen and I have expressed our position that Satan not only hates God's creation, he's not only trying to destroy it, but believes in his hubris that he can travel to other planets and to other stars. There's nothing in the Bible that says that we are going to be traveling the cosmos as physical humans. The context is that God is observing everything, as I shared with you in the beginning here with the scripture. Matthew 10:26. Fear them not, therefore, for there is nothing covered that shall not be revealed, and hid that shall not be known. God sees all of this. Jesus Christ sees all of this. And this is more evidence that God is going to cut short the days, because no man would survive if he continued down this pathway. This pathway of altering the human form, altering the human body. This pathway of destruction of the human life form. This is not augmentation. Do the 180. Apply the 180 to the words, and to the words that you will hear me read and that you can read on your own as you look at these articles. They're trying to present this in a very benevolent fashion. And it is not hard to imagine how this would virtually place you at the control of technology. That if you allowed your body to be augmented in such a fashion, you would be at the beck and call of the technology supporting this augmentation. There's nothing benevolent here. As we get into the art again, the death masks, and I explain those to you, you see the spiritual side that is behind these physical projects. When you see the spiritual side, you know how the physical is going to progress. You know the technology, you know how it's going to be applied, you know the ultimate outcome of the technology, if you know the origins of the technology, which is spiritual. And this is a malevolent spirit behind this. This is not of God. This is not of Jesus Christ, our intercessor. This is not technology led through the Holy Spirit to help humanity. This is grotesque. Let me play this next video here. I apologize. That's the same video. We have a couple of more to go to. Let's jump right into this one. This is a TED Talk, Dr. Oxman. This is from 2019. The title of this is Broken Nature. Now just from the title itself, the hubris of these people to think that nature is somehow broken. Sure, we would like to take care of deformities and diseases, but this goes way beyond that concept. This goes to their perception that somehow God's creation is broken. That man in his hubris, or her hubris, can do better than God. This is about an 18-minute video, so grab your cup of entangled coffee, and sit back and just digest this.
I want to thank Toshiko. She's not here. Hopefully you're online, for calling us all to be mothers. and I'm super honored to share this today. You all know, because as designers today, designers of the physical environment, the environment, architects, engineers, product designers, we are today authoring tools and technologies that allow us not only to design the shape of products and objects and buildings, not only their form, but also their formation, right? So not only the products, but the processes by which to create these objects and place them in the world. And over the past 10 to 15 years, we've been working with biology and with synthetic biologists in the last few years to bring some of these tools into architectural design and into product design, and to help shift the discourse of design across scales, across applications, from the industrial era, from objects that are static, that are discrete, that are mass manufactured, to what we call the biodigital era, objects that are dynamic, that have complex hierarchy, complex structures, that are mass customized, where the product is the factory. So I run you back to the future. So it's a very exciting time for design.
Rewind this just a little bit, because my microphone was still on and the background hum is interfering. So we're going to restart.
We all know, because as designers today, designers of the physical environments, the environment, architects, engineers, product designers, we are today authoring tools and technologies that allow us not only to design the shape of products and objects and buildings, not only their form, but also their formation, right? So not only the products, but the processes by which to create these objects and place them in the world. And over the past 10 to 15 years, we've been working with biology and with synthetic biologists in the last few years to bring some of these tools into architectural design and into product design, and to help shift the discourse of design across scales, across applications, from the industrial era, from objects that are static, that are discrete, that are mass manufactured, where the product is the factory. So I direct a team that is very interdisciplinary nature at MIT called the Mediated Matter Group. And in order to tackle interdisciplinary research, we also need interdisciplinary tools and environments. And one of these environments that we've created, by designers, for designers, is a biosafety 2-level wet lab within which we can synthetically engineered microorganisms that can augment our products and our physical environments. So inspired by Paula's call, and I'm so happy that this conference has come into being, I have done my best to unite the Democratic and the Republican parties of environmental design, the sustainable camp and the ecological camp, those who believe as part of the conservation movement that we should maintain the status quo as is, do not touch nature, do not design nature, do not dare to fix nature, with the ecological movement, the one that claims designing nature is part of the natural evolution of life on Earth. And so I took all of the prefixes I've heard and read over the past few days surrounding broken nature, and created this cycle, which I hope, which is not perfect yet, it has many intellectual holes, but I hope brings these camps together to the original Republican Democratic Party. So respect, reflect. Of course, I started with Dory, because in order to speak, one must listen. Respect nature. So respectful design, reflect, replenish, recover, restore, reclaim, refine, and renew. And then that cycle continues. And continues, and of course, in order to augment, one must first respect. So the projects are set in those 4 quadrants of the diagram. The first, respect and reflect, taking you a year ago to when we were commissioned to design a project for the London Design Museum. It was a collection of death masks that explored what it means to design and build living products. A death mask that transforms into a life mask, if you're a livable, wearable, or product. And in this project, the first series, we looked at respect. We looked at the indigenous communities, at the ancient relic of the death mask across various cultures. And then in studying those respectful designs through computational algorithms and various additive manufacturing techniques and technologies, this one specifically with Stratasys, we've moved to more perhaps utilitarian products. In this case, a mask for Björk that is designed as an exoskeleton that Björk wore while she was singing or giving her performance, that is designed almost like a second skin. So it's designed as a continuous system that moves from bone to ligaments to tendons to as a connective tissue that is a single tissue, unlike in the industrial age where all things are made out of parts. This mask, this wearable, this product, hopefully in the future a building, made of a single system that only varies its properties as a response to environmental constraints. So from digital materials to programmable biopolymers, we've looked at replenishing and recovering the environment. We've been working with natural materials, materials that are taken from the ocean and returned from the ocean, taken from the sea, but also the land, and returned to the sea and the land. And that's what we call a material ecology, a vision where everything that is material in our physical environment, the clothes we wear, the products we use, the buildings we inhabit, are designed as part of the natural ecology. And in a world where we're designing products that generate 300 million tons of plastic a year, in this case, you're looking at a 5-meter structure that is almost entirely biocompatible and biodegradable on demand, that is made as an amphibian structure, part sea, part land, partly shrimp shells, chitosan, and partly cellulose and pectin, made of apples and shrimp shells and trees and bone, calcium carbonate as well. And all of these come together in a parametric chemistry to enable us to design products and structures that could be eaten. A wearable gut that can be worn on the body, and by way of exposing the body to solar energy, one generates the energy one is required to feed one's body and the baby. So in this case, a first of its kind microfluidic wearable that contains micro to macrofluidic channels that are printed with soluble support that enable us to introduce or to contain synthetically engineered microorganisms that can photosynthesize and generate sugar cubes in the pockets for free, if you believe the sun comes for free. And on that point, in the larger scale, moving from wearables to architectural scales, the ability to author new technologies such as, for example, our optically transparent glass printer, which enables us to generate objects that the geometry of which is independently authored externally and internally, unlike glass blowing, which allows us to potentially harness and harvest solar energy on demand. Think of the scaling, the ability to scale that in large context. I like to work in that space. My team enjoys this space because it brings together the production of new technologies, the generation of new scientific knowledge, and of course the creation of useful products and objects. Contained living materials. I mean, we've been working a lot in the area of additive manufacturing and arrived now to a point where we can design at the scale of a red blood cell and even a sperm cell. And that, of course, has biological implications. And the second series of the death masks of Vespers 2 explores what happens when we move from respectful design to this renew design, the ability to contain those channels in a wearable inside a building that can harness biological life. All the pigments that you're looking at in this slide are entirely biologically generated. And so these microorganisms are synthetically engineered to create this variation of pigments across the surface and volume area of an object. And the mask is an excuse to explore in the small scale, and then of course later scale up to the building and the body. But the ability, again, to harness and include or incorporate molecular inducers as part of the additive manufacturing technology allows us to create what we call hybrid living materials, materials that are partly man-made, woman-made, human-woman-made, and partly biological. And finally, programmable materials, of course, which pose the inverse question of sort of phenotype, genotype design and generative design, not asking, assuming we have these materials and these constraints, what forms can we get, but rather asking, assuming we want to arrive at this kind of form, what kind of genetic code must we engineer in order to generate this particular wearable, this particular building facade, and to literally grow it. All of these studies are easily done at the microorganismic scale, and of course, when you scale up to organisms beyond bacteria, it gets even more interesting from an ethical perspective. So the Silk Pavilion, which many of you know, was a 3-meter diameter pavilion that was designed and built using is the wrong verb, inviting 6,500 silkworms to spin an architectural Bucky dome with us. And what was interesting about this project is that it enabled the silkworm to entirely naturally metamorphosize without boiling a single cocoon, and thereby question the way we design with silk in silk farms in China, in India, and elsewhere in the world. Can we get rid of this process of boiling altogether and co-fabricate by cohabitating? This is not only true for silkworms, but also for bees. Can we create, in this case, synthetic apiaries that are designed as perpetual spring environments that can contain the bees during the winter months when they usually go dormant, many of which die? And what does it mean to arm a robotic arm with a set of pheromones and to have this robotic arm act as a queen bee? What happens when technological augmentation supports eusocial organism connection and communication in an age when bees go extinct, and 5 years later, of course, humans go extinct? I will end very quickly with the commission to Paola's show, Broken Nature. I've just spoken briefly about Vespers and our ability to create our ability to create pigments using biological organisms. When we finished the Death Mask series, of course, people said, what is this good for? What is it useful for? All these questions that we always get. But of course, these are, as Susanna says, pilot projects, projects that provide the opportunity to create new technologies. If you switch, if you move from pigments to antibiotics, right? Pigments to melanin, pigments to useful chemical substances, all of a sudden you get a range of products in various scales that are useful. So we have found that we can today engineer melanin. Melanin is the pigment of life. It can be found across, believe it or not, all 6 kingdoms of life, so way before us humans arrived on this planet. It has so many incredible advantages: chemical, biochemical, structural, mechanical, and it can be synthesized in 3 methods. Biological, of course, using melanocytes; bacteriological, very stinky; and chemical. And so we've explored the ability to create a set or a range of these melanin pigments. And of course, we know that with and on the human body, melanin protects from radiation, from UV radiation, and is today considered 10 times more expensive than gold per gram. So in the age of global warming, those substances that define us as humans are the new gems, are the new currency. I'm going to skip the chemical synthesis and show how we scale up the ability to process melanin in a bacterial dish, in a Petri dish, to the architectural scale. And again, using those 3 methods. Biological, using hair, for example.
Well, that's a video I would encourage you to play several times. Again, we're going to take today and tomorrow's live stream to go into this in depth. I'm going to give you some of my thoughts from my notes that I took from this video, having watched it several times myself. You have the benefit of having read the February issue of Entangled magazine. When she spoke of additive printing, now you know what additive printing means. It's basically printing by starting at the bottom and adding layers of material, be it plastic, chemical, biological, even in the case of her death masks that I will describe in a few minutes, using molten glass in an additive fashion. It just means adding material. So they are using that additive process in the building of biological architecture and taking that to the macro scale and literally building building materials, 3D printing structures, buildings, using these materials and this additive process. What I'd like to highlight is that she is saying in the biological, which is really driving this, they're moving away from the plastics. The glass is just simply as she said, a proof of concept process using molten glass to print these death masks. But that's a spiritual discussion we're going to get into in just a moment. But moving to, in the printing world, away from strictly an additive process of adding materials in the printing, but to the growing of materials. And that growth of materials taking place, growing from the cellular level upward, whether you're talking about devices to be worn by the body externally or internal materials within the body itself, or these architectural materials actually being grown from biological material, starting, as she said, in the Petri dish, and adding biological polymers. Polymers are nothing more than multiple materials. Polymers means poly materials, multiple materials. Oftentimes we think of polymers as plastics. This is being used, that word being used to biological material, biopolymers, multiple biological materials placed in a growth medium. I've mentioned E. coli in the past. They will use sugars and a sugar-based material as a substrate, but also in several of the videos that you can find on YouTube, and you can also find on Vimeo just by typing in her name, Neri Oxman, Dr. Neri Oxman, or Neri, I believe it is in the Israeli or Hebraic pronunciation. She's an Israeli American, hence the accent. Being able to place in the E. coli medium in a petri dish in a starting container and allowing this material to rapidly grow. One of the things about E. coli is that what's found in our body, it's found in the stomach, in the gut, so to speak. It's a very robust material and replicates very quickly. So it makes for a good growth medium for this process of applying biopolymers to literally grow structures. As you saw, and unfortunately for the Blog Talk Radio audience, you didn't see it, but growing architectural products using biological material such as pectin from apples, sugars, using the ground up shells taken from crustaceans such as lobsters and shrimp, predominantly shrimp in the example that they showed. Taking polymaterials, multiple biological materials, and mixing them together, placing them in a growth medium and allowing them on their own from within, from the bottom up, to grow into the architectural form that the biological materials themselves are dictating. Again, you need to listen to this video a couple of times very carefully, but she's talking about designing not from outside. In other words, we as humans determining the design, the architecture, but this is the way that the world of design, whether it's fashion or architecture or in research into the human body and its design and function, all areas of design across the broad spectrum are now jumping on this bandwagon of biological design, allowing the biological entity, the life form they've created, I'm using her words, taking the biological life form they have designed and created and allowing that new biological life form to grow and produce its own design on its own structure. Okay? Again, from reading the magazine, Entangled Magazine, you have the benefit of understanding when I talk about in silico design, in the computer, designing DNA, designing other biological life forms, starting at the DNA level. And she doesn't really get into that too much. She's not giving the whole story to you, even in the multitudes of videos that are out there in which she's made presentations. She does not really get into the DNA aspect of this biological design and growth process, meaning they're keeping that out of the public venue. I have shared with you now in several issues of Entangled Magazine the process by which not just mapping the human genome, but redesigning the human genome first in the computer. This is beyond CRISPR. This is not just gene splicing. We're talking about going down to the building blocks, the ribosomes, the nucleotides, the proteins of DNA, and rearranging those building blocks literally as designer DNA. This is what she's not sharing with you, and is fully at play here. In silico, they will design the biological life form that then at a cellular level, this is up beyond the DNA level now because the DNA has replicated and produced a cell. They are now able to take those cells from different biological sources, different in silico designs, combine them as a polymer, a biopolymer, and allow this new life form that they've created first in the computer, determined from the computer extrapolation, what they believe this life form will appear as and how it will behave, thus what it will produce architecturally, design-wise. They place it in a growth medium and they allow it to grow. So when we think in terms of Christianity and the Word, the Bible, and we hear things like, as in the days of Noah, and the discussion goes off into fallen angels, giants, Nephilim, we're beyond that, folks. We are way beyond talking about the Nephilim. Yes, the spirit of the Nephilim still continues post-flood. We know that the fallen angels, the spirit of the fallen angels are at work. We've discussed that at length. We are now moving beyond the discussion of the Nephilim, and we are into the discussion of new forms of biological life. They want to say and highlight that this is all about design, natural materials that they use in the design process, and that they can recycle these biological materials. She talks about the silk from the silkworm. She talks about the melanin. She talks about the powdered form of crustacean cells, as from shrimp. It's way beyond that. This is going down to the DNA level of those materials, of those animals, of those life forms. So don't be misled here that they're just simply talking about bioprinting, whether it's additive or the other forms of bioprinting that are going on that are top down, or that they are growing materials, designing materials, such that the biology is determining the architecture, determining the design. They know full well in the computer what's going to result from the mixing, the merging of these different biological materials. That's what they're hiding from you. I've shared all of that with you in the magazine. You know the technology that's really at play here now. I've shown you the factual evidence from the papers, from the laboratories. None of this is conjecture. This is beyond hypothetical. This is not a hypothesis. I've presented the evidence of evil, as I like to call it, or have to call it. Now I'm showing you literally the outcome, the outgrowth of everything that I have foundationally shared with you in the magazine and in the live streams. There is no doubt that this is from the pit of hell. I feel sorry for people like Dr. Neri Oxman, that they have been so deceived, and they are completely now in a state of operating in a delusional manner. Let me take a little sidebar note here. As you watch this video and the other videos we'll share today, and then you can watch on your own, pay attention to her body English. I speak often about psychology, and part of psychology is body English. Watch her body English. Specifically, what I'm getting at here is the fact that she smiles the entire time that she is addressing the audience. This is what the false preachers do. Scripture says that when someone is smiling as they lie to you, obviously they're deceiving you. If someone is delivering a message to you and they continually are smiling, they are trying to deceive you. Look at Joel Osteen when he delivers to those huge stadiums full of people. And he's smiling through his words, and his words pass by his smile. She does exactly the same thing. She's trying to make it appear benevolent, warm and fuzzy, that there's nothing to look deeper at here, to simply take what she is saying as gospel, that it is benevolent. She does not want the audience to think there's anything dangerous or nefarious going on. Thus, she smiles. Okay? She is almost euphoric, almost giddy in her presentations. I've watched many of her videos. She is in a delusional trance-like state. You just listen to the delivery of her words and watch her body English. I think it is clear to me, I think the discernment through the Holy Spirit is saying this woman is severely, not depressed, severely possessed. I pray for her soul because she has been extremely deluded and deceived. This process of printing is what is known as microfluidic. Microfluidic, meaning that they have nozzles on the printers, these bioprinters, that have what they describe as resolution. Now, when you think of the word resolution, you're thinking my computer monitor, my television screen, that resolution, that clarity of the image. They're applying the word resolution in much the same fashion. When we think about resolution, we think about how many pixels per inch, per square inch, are embedded in this computer monitor or television, digital television screen. Okay? How many pixels per square inch? Or when you're using a digital camera. Same thing in printing. Whether you're using traditional printing methodologies, think back to the old days of dot matrix printing, if you will. But in this 3D printing process, they now have a resolution of 20 millimeters, down to the diameter of a human hair. That's how specific they can be in placing one dot of biological material and then one right next to it. A high degree of resolution. This goes beyond typical 3D printing using plastics and even glass. We are talking about a resolution at the cellular level of printing. Now, let's pull back to the macro scale perspective. When we get into these discussions about synthetic life forms, and we talk about the printing of organs and skeletal systems and vascular systems, the question often comes to mind, often arises, could they 3D print an entire human body such that it would actually be indistinguishable from another human body? The obvious answer is yes. Using microfluidics, think of syringe needles if you need an analogy. Syringe needles, say 24 gauge, 26 gauge, 28 gauge needles. Needles that are the diameter of a human hair being inserted into your skin to give you a medication. This is the resolution, this is the scale at which they are depositing biological materials by design in a pattern designed in the computer first at the DNA scale and now up at the millimeter scale, depositing those new biologically in the silico computer designed DNA substances, those biological materials, the biopolymers. These polymers are being deposited with near microscopic precision by these 3D printers. This goes beyond what I shared with you in the February issue of Entangled magazine, talking about nearly a dozen types of printing, 3D printing, cellular printing. This goes beyond that. I gave you the foundational material in the Entangled magazine. Now I'm taking you in this building block process of learning to the next level. Here you are seeing their ability to print an entire human body, and she even stated that. She even stated that they could print, and you have to listen to it very carefully. It went by very quickly, in which she was talking about building these augmented systems for the human body. She then says, and an entire human body. I only need to report to you their own words. I don't need to hypothetically deliver the information or even use conjecture. I simply report to you what I've researched, their own words, just like I had done with Sanctuary. Okay? I'm going to share with you another video. This is on designing form. This is about 20 minutes. I may skip through it for the sake of brevity, but let's go ahead and listen to some of this.
So, for many years now, and it's been many years, I've been asking myself this one simple question. What is the origin of form? How do we invent form? Where do we begin? How do we think of generating a product, a building, a city, a piece of clothing? How do we start to think about this process? Is it a preconceived image of a narrative? Do we design form by immaculate conception, intelligent design? Is it a matter of getting rid of the stone that is in the way, as Michelangelo once pointed? Or perhaps it is an idea about technology and optimization and function. But if indeed form is to follow function, how is that function tested, evaluated, validated? According to whom and by which criteria? This is ant farm. Pneumatic structures for the naked. And so it has been my assumption that design by shift of perspective may be considered perhaps a second nature. And it is in the prospect of this natural way of making things that I've, over the years, accumulated a set of design research experiments with the aim of formulating a new design approach that is inspired by nature. And so the pioneers of such a design approach are few, but like Buckminster Fuller and like Frei Otto, they're immense, immense in stature. And so those are my heroes, my 99. They were the form finders of the 70s, and they've asked themselves not what an object wants to be, but rather what does a material want to be? What does an environment want to be? Those were the generation of designers that developed a hands-off approach to design. And it is in the spirit of such intellectual predecessors that have left us with this legacy of a natural way of making things that has profound implications of the way in which we make things in the world today, and also great significance as to how we perceive this set of ideas about sustainability. And so how do we begin to think about natural design? So I began by searching for answers in nature, and it was early on when I discovered that nature authors not forms, but processes to think about form. Recipes that mix material and environment together, and it is due to those mixtures and those relationships that form emerges. So I began collecting and mapping and classifying all sorts of types of precedents and procedures, and this is essentially a one-liner of my entire PhD dissertation. And I've developed a method called computationally enabled form finding, which has to do with bringing together material properties and environmental constraints, mixing them together, and then generating form out of them. And so the idea is that a designer could then approach those tools and use them in different ways. He becomes an editor of constraints. And so instead of designing 2- or 3-dimensional forms and then sending them off to the engineers for analysis, whether structural analysis, environmental analysis, and optimizations, traditional ways that we're thinking about design, the idea here is to ask, how do we put design on its head? And we start from analysis. We start from the environment. We start from material properties. And we generate 3-dimensional form out of this process. So before we moved into computational algorithms, just a few words about what can nature do for us and what can't it? So I wanted to focus on 2 of nature's greatest features that have been a great inspiration for my work, have always been and will always remain. And those are those following 2 features. The first one is that nature is a grand material engineer. We already know that it can generate abalone shells, which are twice as tough as our high-tech ceramics, and it can generate silk, which is 5 times stronger than steel, so it knows how to organize matter. Nature also designs for the multifunctional. A leaf structure can support itself structurally, while at the same time converting light into sugar in the process of photosynthesis. This is our day lunch, I've heard today. Also, our muscles support ourselves mechanically, but at the same time they manage and conserve our energy. But there are a lot of things that nature cannot do. It is so arranged that trees do not grow into the heaven. This is from Goethe's Life and Poetry. And why can't trees grow into the heaven? Well, because nature has not invented pumps. We humans have, and this is why we have the skyscraper, right? Nature hasn't worked with wheels either. We use wheels for movement. Nature uses other mechanisms for movement. But interestingly, it's precisely those criteria, mass production versus nature mass customization, or uni versus nature multifunctional design, that the Industrial Revolution rejected completely and up to this date. And so I grew up with this image. My parents are both architects, and my dear father presented me with this image many, many years ago. This is the first glass skyscraper maquette by Mies van der Rohe from the 1920s, and it's sort of the antithesis of my reason for being here in this world, which is the separation between materials and functions. So there is steel. Steel takes care of the structural performance of the building, and glass is assigned the environmental performance of the building, right? So separations of materials to different disparate functions. So we beat nature in size and speed to a certain scale range, and you'll hear more about how we don't by church. But there are a lot of things that we harm our already injured planet because of those pumps and those wheels, right? We waste steel, we waste oil, we increase our carbon footprint to an unimaginable rate. And so the next question is, how do we begin to think of a natural way to design that uses and utilizes those principles of nature, but in scales that match human production and that embrace technological advancement? Can we think about a Nature 2.0 initiative? What does it mean to beat nature today? What does it mean to design in a sustainable way? And so, if you understand this image, you'll understand my entire work. This is a membrane of an eggshell. This is how nature makes things. And like most objects and artifacts of Mother Nature, it's made of fibers. The fibers are articulated in such a way that they distribute the loads equally on the surface area of the eggshell, while at the same time, so this is the material engineer, while at the same time, multifunctionality, they allow for food absorption, heat exchange, etc. So there's a lot of functions that are incorporated just by controlling those materials and designing them. And so in the spring of 2008, I've been approached by Paola Antonelli for her show, Designing the Elastic Mind in MoMA. And she asked me to design 4 new objects for the show. I was terribly excited, but I decided instead of designing 4 objects, I would design 4 processes. So instead of designing 4 objects or 4 forms, I would design 4 processes for the generation of form. The underlying theme for the generation of those processes was exactly the idea of multifunctionality. The idea that a structure can sustain itself structurally, but can also conduct heat or conduct thermal gain. And so remember Mies, again, the antithesis of Mies. We're moving onwards towards designing and engineering systems that incorporate performance criteria. And so monocoque was my first project. It stands for French, a structural skin from the avionic industry. And the shear stress line and the surface pressure are embodied in the surface by the allocation and the relative thickness of those vein-like elements that are built into the skin. So this structural skin was 3D printed, much like we do 2D printing, but just 3D printing 3-dimensional objects from 2 materials. The black, dark material is stiff and cares for the structural performance of this building skin. And the white material is soft, it lets light through, and it lets temperature and heat exchange through. So again, the designer, as he or she is designing, can manipulate the thickness of those vein-like elements depending on the type of load and the direction of that load. Fate Maps was an experiment in reconstructing natural tissues by controlling fiber directionality. So you start from micrographs, from biological specimens, you understand how material behaves, and you scale up this behavior not only in dimension, but again, in terms of its physical articulation of the fibers. This is a butterfly scale. And as much as nature sculpts sand and soil with air and with water, ray counting was a project that the theme of which was sculpting with light. And so the designer can control the thickness of this translucent surface by relating it to constraints of light performance, by deciding how much shading he or she desires in a certain space. So the designer, again, becomes kind of a gardener, an experimenter that generates lots of options. Clearly, a glass house in Iceland would behave in a completely different way than a glass house in the Sahara Desert. And so we're generating lots of options, just like our melanin skin tone changes in different geographical locations. We're generating different options, we're eliminating them, and we're working towards environmental fitness. Now, environmental fitness is an idea that nature knows very, very well, and it is pronounced in a very elegant way in the human bone. The human bone has the capacity to modulate itself as it is alive, to remodel itself according to structural loads. So it was Julius Wolff who discovered in the late 19th century that the bone has this capacity, while stimulated with additional weight, to build more little beams, more trabeculi, more calcified structure, and to change its structure as it's moving. So it's doing the analysis, the modeling, and the fabrication in one process. We don't. We separate between modeling, analysis, and fabrication. And so when we go to outer space, we lose bone tissue. When we become pregnant, we gain this bone tissue. And so the bone knows exactly how to adapt its material organization, how to work towards multifunctionality and customization, depending on the type of load. So, okay, so now that we sort of understood those major general and abstract ideas, how are those ideas from the world of art and from the world of design come to portray themselves in more practical applications in the medical industry, but also in technology? So I always ask not what science can do for design, but what can design do for science? So what can design do for science? What can design do for technology? So we know that we can, using those algorithms today, we know we can map load. We know that we can map heat. We know that we can map light. But what about the medical industry? Can we import some of these understandings to design better medical devices? And so what about the mapping of pain? And so pain is this personal thing, and it's different between individual and individual. It has always been difficult to map, and it has always been poorly treated by the medical industry, especially Western medicine. And so here the idea was to come up with a project that is a process that I call second skin. And the idea of second skin is basically to map the pain profile of a particular patient and to distribute hard and soft materials depending on his or her anatomical or physiological pathologies. The project was inspired by animal coding patterns, only instead of color, we're now controlling stiffness graduation. So instead of the different colors that emerge for those animals, we're controlling the material properties. And I've been lucky and honored to collaborate with Professor Craig Carter from the Department of Material Science at MIT on this project. So we've designed a protective glove against carpal tunnel syndrome. So for those of you who know or don't know, carpal tunnel syndrome is the syndrome, the condition of which the median nerve is compressed at the wrist, and it leads to weakness, to pain, to muscle atrophy. And so here the idea was that if we could map the pain profile of each patient, we could then affect and customize the glove to this particular pathology. The problem with immobilized braces in today's industry is that because they're mass produced, they're often too big, too small, too constraining in terms of movement. And so is there a way to then map the specific pain profile by unfolding the skin, literally, of your wrist, well, not literally, but digitally, and then reformulating this pain profile as a set of graduation of stiff and soft materials that would cater to hold and allow you to constrain the movement in a flexible way. So these are the gloves. I fell off my bike yesterday, and I'm a vivid bike rider, and so I'm waiting for my gloves to be printed. This is a zoomed in view that shows you that every molecule metaphorically in this glove, again, the question of dynamic range, how do you define one component in the glove which reacts to pain is very important. And so the idea that one molecule equals one bit almost in terms of its behavioral capacity is very, very important here. And so this is, you're looking at the first prototype, which will be displayed in a couple of days in the Museum of Science. Similarly, BEAST was a project to generate a customizable chaise lounge, which is made of one material. It's 3D printed, and this material changes in thickness, but it has different material properties. It has different mixtures and different compositions. So it sustains, it holds itself structurally, while at the same time it accounts for certain physiological pressure points of the user. And so think of wearing your acupuncturist or wearing your massage therapist to work. And so these 5 materials change color. The darker, the stiffer, the lighter, the more softer. There are also silicone bumps that are attached to the skin of this chaise. All right, so medical industry product design. How do we instead of using those ideas and importing them to products that are useful for us as humans, how do we now reconsider how we reinvent our technologies for construction? So it was Louis Kahn who said, consider the momentous event in architecture when the wall parted and the column became. For me, the wall and the column, as for nature, is one thing. It's just a matter of how material redistributes itself to cater for those different conditions. And so the idea was how to now take some of those ideas and generate a new technology that would cater for a more sustainable way of making and doing things. And so we know that if 50% of new commercial buildings were built with 50% less energy, we would be saving 6 metric million tons of CO2 for the life of buildings. Can we print buildings as if we were 3D printing bones? Can we save that 50% of material? Yes. So now a brand new invention of mine at the MIT Media Lab is development of this new technology. It's called variable property printing. And the idea of this technology is to allow one to map those structural conditions and generate variation in porosity and variation in elasticity to generate this effort in material efficiency. So we would be printing buildings as if we would be printing oysters 100, 1,000 times their scale. We would have one material, we would vary its properties, and we can control soft and stiff materials, opaque and translucent materials. I wanted to end on this one note, commemorating the power of design today. I was thinking that whenever we think of a momentous world problem or a persistent threat that is posing to harm humanity today, whether it's poverty, whether it's climate change, whether it's the medical industry, whatever solutions, ingenious solutions are generated, they have always and will always consist of design. Design is truly alive because it's truly, truly relevant. As we move in this moment of transition, not in the receiving end of change, but in the sending end of change. And it's high time that we've transcended the fallen state of design from the sanctuary, the dinosaur sanctuary of style, into a new and exciting paradigm of making, literally making our future. And it's happening. So thank you.
Well, my friends, rather sobering. I've been watching the chat room here and paying attention to your comments. So where I'd like to take you is to the death masks, because this is going to show you the spiritual influence of what is behind all of this technology. Before I get into that, and we're going to conclude at 2 o'clock today, so we have about a half hour. And we are going to talk about this tomorrow. I am going to postpone tomorrow's class until next week, and we will continue to get much deeper into this. The website at Mediated Materials has an awful lot of information. I encourage you to look at that website between now and tomorrow's live stream. Even 2 hours is not enough to really dissect this and get into it. So you really need to look at it yourself. The relevance to our life, I think, is self-evident. If they are talking about bioprinting, human 2.0, that's relevant to us. They're talking about changing the materials used in the structures that we live in and work in, that we interact with. That's relevant. So let me take you back to something that I found both amusing and concerning, and that was her citation of Buckminster Fuller. We haven't got to the example, and we'll probably do it tomorrow, where they're using silkworms. And she briefly mentioned it in the first video, but using silkworms to spin silk over a predefined geodesic dome, a Bucky dome, as she mentioned. and citing the work of Buckminster Fuller as somehow appropriate to the work that they're doing. If all they were talking about was architecture and the use of natural materials for the construct of buildings, building structural materials, I could see the appropriate citation of Buckminster Fuller. But this is much like counterfeiting Jesus Christ as the mediator of us to God. But taking Buckminster Fuller, who is obviously, I've spent a lot of time praising Buckminster Fuller in my radio programs, live streams, and in the magazine. Succinctly said, Buckminster Fuller would not approve of what they're doing insofar as the biological side, the augmentation, the modification, the production of human 2.0 as she presented. Human 2.0 is what they are trying to accomplish. He would not approve of that. I have read his biography. I've read a number of his books. He was talking about, yes, let's use the environment appropriately. He was definitely a person who was trying to make good, appropriate use of the materials at hand. His bottom line philosophy was do more with less. He did not want us using natural gas and petroleum products. He believed in being able to solve the world's problems through technology. Technology applied in a beneficial, benevolent fashion. I would venture to say that, and this is not literal, I'm just using a turn of phrase, he would turn over in his grave at the use of his name and his architectural designs in the context of what she is talking about. So, Buckminster Fuller, the tetrahedrons, the geodesic dome certainly is being presented in here. But I needed to sort of speak for Buckminster and defend his sense of design as he pursued it for the benefit of mankind, not for the destruction of God's creation. Okay? So, segue into the spiritual side. On the screen now is a death mask, one of many. This is a glass death mask produced with molten glass in a 3D printer. This is a side view of it. I'm going to leave that particular one up as I begin to discuss this a little more. Of all the things that someone could choose as a prototype, as a proof of concept in this process of microfluidic printing down at the molecular scale, at the resolution of 20 millimeters, the resolution down to the thickness of a human hair. Why would you choose death masks? I'll let that sink in for a little bit. This is again something that is a wearable device outside the human body, obviously to be placed around the pelvic girdle. Okay? Again, images of these external devices to be worn by humans. This is grotesque. This is another death mask. These were on exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art and also over in Paris. Here she's wearing a death mask. This is a PhD in computational design and architecture. Why would you design something so grotesque? You saw this in the video. These are MRI images of the actual person's cellular structure, the bone structure. MRI images that are producing the mask. So where does the mask come from? I'm going to leave that image up for just a moment. I'm going to go to their website. This is called Vespers. The theme, the name of this display, this exhibit of these death masks was called Vespers. Vespers is a sunset evening prayer service in the Orthodox, Roman Catholic, and Eastern Catholic, Anglican, and Lutheran liturgies. The word comes from the Greek vesperia and the Latin vesper, meaning evening. Okay? They choose their words specifically. These are spiritual connotations. DNA assembly in 3D printed fluidics. This is a white paper. So you don't think that I'm making all this up when I talk about 3D printing. Human 2.0. We're going to come back to the mask in just a moment. I want that to kind of sink in while I read this scientific peer-reviewed paper on DNA assembly in 3D printed fluidics. And this is from 2015. The process of connecting genetic parts, DNA assembly, is a foundational technology for synthetic biology. Microfluidics present an attractive solution for minimizing use of costly reagents, enabling multiplexed reactions, and automating protocols by integrating multiple protocol steps. However, microfluidics fabrication and operation can be expensive and requires expertise, limiting access to the technology. With advances in commodity digital fabrication tools, it is now possible to directly print fluidic devices and supporting hardware. 3D printed micro and millifluidic devices are inexpensive, easy to make, and quick to produce. Now they're talking about demonstrating using what is known as the Golden Gate DNA assembly process. This is not the Golden Gate Bridge. We're talking about the Golden Gate in the Third Temple. The temple had a silver gate and a golden gate. This is spiritual. This is in a peer-reviewed white paper. Okay? Golden Gate DNA assembly in 3D printed fluidics with reaction volumes as small as 490 nanoliters, with channel widths as fine as 220 microns. Okay? A 3D printed syringe pump with an accompanying programmable software interface was designed and fabricated to operate the devices. Quick turnaround and inexpensive materials allowed for rapid exploration of device parameters, demonstrating a manufacturing paradigm for designing and fabricating hardware for synthetic biology. Now that's the abstract. I'm not going to obviously read the entire article, white paper. What they are talking about is DNA assembly using 3D printing. Okay? This is cellular level. This is synthetic biology. This is what is going on at Sanctuary when they talk about synths and indistinguishable from a human body. I've shared this with you in many issues of Entangled magazine and in live streams. This is here today. I just showed you the actual scientific paper, and there are many, to back up what I'm saying. This is how these masks are produced. So what is the origin of a death mask? Neri Oxman and her mediated matter group at MIT Media Lab have created a series of colorful death masks that explore the transition between life and death. This was published in 2016 in the magazine Dezeen, D-E-Z-E-E-N, Dezeen. Designed in collaboration with 3D printing company Stratasys, the Vespers collection is made up of a 3 series of 5 death masks. I have a couple of those. Let me put this back up on the screen. You can obviously see the face of the demon in here. You don't have to be Jonathan Kleck to see the demon in this death mask. I will continue to read this. The first series to be released is named Present. Conceptually, it is the second in the 3 series, and it aims to prompt discussion about the transition period between life and death. The first collection, which is yet to be released, will look at the natural world, while the final installment revolves around rebirth. Folks, I only have to report this to you. I don't have to make this up. This is what they believe in. This is what is behind what they're trying to say is so benevolent. The custom death mask in the ancient world was believed to strengthen the spirit of the deceased and guard their soul from evil spirits on their way to the afterworld, Oxman told Dezeen. Vesper masks 5 imaginary martyrs. Each martyr is memorialized 3 times through sequential interpretations at 3 different moments: the past, the present, and the future. Each mask was formed using a Stratasys Object 5 Connects 3 multi-material 3D printer, which constructs 3D forms by depositing polymer droplets in layers. For the project, the team created custom software that allowed them to model high-resolution and complex shapes based on data. The shapes and colors of the 5 masks in the second series are derived from the shapes and colors of the first series, which are made from natural minerals. The colorful, swirly layers are inspired by one of Oxman's previous masks named Lazarus and are intended as a reference to the wearer's last breath. Let me explain that. Okay? Death masks from multitudes of cultures were employed at the moment that a person who was dying exhaled their last breath. The mask was intended to capture that breath. Think about when God created everything. He spoke everything into existence. This is a counterfeiting by Satan of God's process of breathing everything into existence, breathing life. Think about when he created Adam and he gave him life by breathing into him. This is Satan's counterfeit process. The death mask was to carry someone into another life and to achieve immortality. Remember what I have said to you over and over about Silicon Valley's goal. The predominant direction in which venture capital investment monies are directed is into the achievement of immortality. That is the pinpoint goal of the transhumanist movement, is achieving immortality, godlike status, the age-old lie from the Garden of Eden. You can see the source by knowing Scripture. You can see the spiritual behind this through the discernment of the Holy Spirit. We do not have to be smiled to and lied to and deceived by someone who is demonically possessed to see this, to know what is behind it. When they use words like, names like the beast for that material in the video, Lazarus, the name of one of her presentations. They put it right out there. They don't care. They think people won't even look into this like we are. Her words, combined, the three series represent the transition from life to death or death to life, depending on one's reading of the collection, said Oxman. The inner structures are entirely data-driven and are designed to match the resolution of the structures found in nature. Data-driven. The title of my February issue of Entangled, The Density of Data. They are taking the data from the human genome, from the DNA. Okay? The masks are data-driven because they're taking MRIs, which produce a digital model of the cellular structure of the body. And they use that to produce the death mask in silico and 3D printed. It's all in the magazine already. You have the foundational material and understanding now to see what it is that I'm presenting to you. And these are grotesque. Continuing to quote from her, expressed through changes in formal and material heterogeneity, from discontinuous to smooth, from surface to volume, from discrete to continuous, this series conveys the notion of metamorphosis. That is transhumanism, folks. The metamorphosis to her own statement of human 2.0, of synthetic biology. Oxman's mask debuted at the opening exhibition of London's new design museum. Named Fear and Love, it explores a spectrum of issues that define our time and also includes installations by Oma and Hussein Callahan. Vespers is the latest 3D printing research project from Mediated Matter Group. Previous research includes 3D printed wearable skins designed to facilitate synthetic biological processes and investigations into how to use silkworms to print architectural structures. Now, we're coming up on 2 hours here. We have a lot more to cover tomorrow. From their website at Mediated Matter, they are talking about fiber bots, design of multi-agent fiber composite digital fabrication system. That's the architectural, using fibers to build structures. The next one is making data matter. Voxel printing from the digital fabrication of data across scales and domains. Water-based additive manufacturing. Digital construction environment. 3D printing using glass. The Silk Pavilion. This is where they took Buckminster Fuller's geodesic dome as a structure and placed 1,600 silkworms on the structure. They laid eggs and reproduced, and they produced silk filaments over this geodesic dome to illustrate the use of biological fabrication of products and architectural scale materials. A synthetic apiary. An apiary is a beehive. Synthetically, they were producing apiaries for bees to be able to produce year-round, not go dormant and die in the winter. You know all about the death of the bees that's going on. Well, Hegelian dialectic, problem, reaction, solution. They're presenting the solution, the synthetic one. The living materials library, the control of living systems as part of design interfaces, is of interest to both the scientific and design communities. And 3D printing of the buildings. Someone in chat said earlier, maybe they'll 3D print using these biological materials, biological 3D printing materials to build the third temple. You've been listening to me, haven't you? I said I believed that they would 3D print the third temple? Perhaps, and this is conjecture, perhaps they won't use stone to 3D print it. Perhaps they'll biologically 3D print it. Printing multi-material 3D microfluidics, computation and fabrication in biology occur in aqueous environments through on-chip mixing, analysis, and fabrication. You saw this, you caught this in the chat room. BEAST. BEAST is an organic-like entity created synthetically by the incorporation of physical parameters into digital form generation protocols. They present on their website Digital Construction Platform version 1. Gemini, an acoustical twin chiasm, spans multiple scales of the human existence, extending from the warmth of the womb to the stretches of reality. MetaMesh, computational model for design and fabrication of biomimetic scaled body armors. Biomimetic scaled body armors. Have you read my second book, 2048 Diamonds in the Rough? Body armor consisting of nanodiamonds. Have you read 2048 Diamonds in the Rough, in which the sentient submarine, known as the Steve Irwin, is both synthetic in its body and a quantum computer that is sentient? The body of the submarine is a manta ray. It swims and it flies, and it is constructed of biomimetic scaled material known as nanodiamonds. Read the book. What I'm sharing with you here today is all in my second novel, 2048 Diamonds in the Rough. Continuing on the website, Bots of Babel, the biblical story of the Tower of Babel involved in a deliberate plan hatched by mankind to construct a platform from which man could fight God. The tower represented the first documented attempt at constructing a vertical city. The divine response to the master plan was to sever communication by instilling a different language in each other. Tragically, the building's ultimate destruction came about through the breakdown of communications between its fabricators. In this installation, we redeem the Tower of Babel by creating its antithesis. We will construct a virtuous, decentralized, yet highly communicative building environment of cable-suspended fabrication bots that together build structures bigger than themselves. We explore themes of asynchronous motion, multinodal fabrication, lightweight additive manufacturing, and the emergence of form through fabrication. Folks, I do not have to make this up to say that this is from the pit of hell. There's much more. We've run out of time. Please look at their website, www.media.mit.edu. Mediated matter. Just type it in and you'll get it. Spend some time looking through this. This is relevant to everyday life. This is human 2.0. This is synthetic life forms. This is synths. This is the counterfeiting of God's construct. This is blasphemous. This is where Satan believes he can redefine nature and redesign nature in his own image. This will result, as I said in the January issue of Entangled magazine, and I backed it up with the February issue. This is the image of the beast, plain and simple. Look at the death masks. That's an image of the beast. The first beast had 7 horns and 10 crowns. The second beast arose from the earth and created through man, forced man. The second beast forced man to create an image of the first beast. It's all in the magazine. All the technology. Everything exists. Everything is here to create the image of the beast. The abomination of desolation that will set itself up as God, to be worshipped as God, the image of the beast in the third temple. I showed you the holograms in the February issue that combine with the 3D printers. The holograms that will be solid, a solid image of the beast, by combining the technology of the density of the data that present time produces solid holographic images, combined with the biotechnology that I've just shown you and outlined in the magazine. How the image of the beast will be constructed and presented in the third temple. This is not me. This is the Holy Spirit revealing this to you. This is God speaking to you, not me. Matthew 10:26. Fear them not, therefore, for there is nothing covered that shall not be revealed, and hid that shall not be known. The Holy Spirit is showing it to you. I'm just the vessel. I'm just the witness. Kathleen and I simply follow the leading of the Holy Spirit to whatever material He wants revealed. Those of you on Blog Talk Radio, I encourage you to join in the conversation through Patreon so that you have the benefit of seeing these things live with us. There is nothing here to be fearful of. God is in control of this. But this is why He says, during the time of the tribulation, the Great Tribulation, towards the end of the Great Tribulation, He cut short the days. Otherwise, no man would survive. We are showing you the destruction of the human race. We're showing you the technology that they are trying to sell as benevolent. We are showing you the malignancy, the malevolent, the from the pit of hell spiritual origins of these technologies. I do not have to place this in the realm of conjecture or hypothesis. I share with you their own evidence, their own testimony, as Matthew 10:26 clearly demonstrated would be done and is being done. Please join me tomorrow at noon Eastern Time. We will continue the conversation on exploring this information that I've only scratched the surface of today. Please do your homework. I'm going to check the chat room real quick before we sign off. All right. Yeah, I think a longer video. I see the comment here from Martin Miller. I think Doug, I know Doug Diamond, my webmaster, and just an extraordinarily talented individual in the technology of video and audio and in website. I can't do this without him. He and I will put our heads together and see what we can do with this, see how we can put together a concise video presentation of this material. It would take a lot of work to do this only on my side, not on Doug's side, to pull all the material together. I think what we'll do is we'll continue tomorrow on Thursday and present this material. And then I think as a group, we can try to figure out what the highlights are going to be. You can email me the things that you would like me to highlight in a video. I work for you. You tell me what key points, doing your homework, that you would like to see in a video, that then you could take that video and very concisely be able to pass this on to other people. So it's a great idea. Okay. I thank you guys. We have an excellent group here of critical thinkers. This is what we are encouraging, is for people to think about these topics that I introduced to you, that Kathleen introduces to you, that will then spark you, inspire you to do your own research. There's so much out there. It's hard to know where to start. And so what I'm trying to do, and Kathleen's trying to do, is give you starting points for your own research and to involve your own critical thinking processes. You are intelligent people. You can see as much as we can see. We're just kind of starting you in certain directions of research. Please communicate to me through email. Anything that comes to mind that you find of important note that you want me to explore or that you have found. It's just a two-way communication here. This is very serious stuff, folks. You know it's serious. I don't sensationalize. I don't put a bunch of stuff out on YouTube to try to get a whole bunch of clicks and a whole bunch of views. I don't hold seminars. I don't sell tickets. I'm not a carnival barker. Okay? I am a serious researcher, and that's why you're here. Because you are intelligent people. You want real information, not sensational nonsense. And I thank you from my heart, and I speak for Kathleen on this as well. I thank you for hiring us through Patreon and allowing us to be your reporters. We have a friendship here that has developed that we value very highly, and we respect you. So we have this safe environment where we can think critically and we can share information calmly and without interruptions, because this has serious implications for our day right now in the present time, not in the future. So no fear. God's in control of this. He knows what's going on, and he's revealing it to us. I thank you for being here today. God bless you all. Lord willing, we will be back here tomorrow at noon Eastern Time on Thursday, and we will continue the conversation. God bless you all.